Hello, and welcome to part 3 of my discussion of single-family property assessments in York, Maine. In this video, I will discuss the best way to make comparisons of land value between properties and neighborhoods. My last video introduced the term desirability index, but I didn't properly describe that concept. Land desirability is a relative term, but is essentially the assessor's view of a land's inherent value. If you compare the land assessment of two 0.2 acre lots, A and B. If A's land assessment is higher than B, then A is more desirable than land B. It's obvious that if its land is valued higher, it must be more desirable. This simply means that for whatever reason, the assessor has determined that A is more desirable than B. If, however, you are comparing two lots of different size, there is no straightforward way to compare land assessment, since York land value is based on a land curve. For example, a 0.4 acre lot is not valued at 2 times that of a 0.2 acre lot. This is where the desirability index comes into play. That number allows us to compare any property or neighborhood, regardless of lot size, to any other property or neighborhood in a direct way. In my last slide, I will show you the top 20 most desirable neighborhoods and individual parcels of land in York. Here is a slide reproduced from my last video showing a rank order of neighborhood desirability with the most desirable neighborhoods on the left. I used this plot to show that neighborhood 135 is now the 12th most desirable neighborhood in York. It seemed surprising to me at the time, but the numbers don't lie. In the next slide, I will show you how these numbers come about. Last time I described York's land value assessment process and how vision appraisal software calculates the land value of all residential properties. I reproduced this calculation using Excel. An initial land price is obtained from the curve at the corresponding acreage, and then several multipliers dependent on neighborhood and site index are applied, and then out pops the land value. So neighborhood, acreage, site index, influence factor, neighborhood adjustment factor, and then it works its way through to give a final land value. So it's a complicated calculation which involves many factors, but it puts out a land value based on those variables. This value can be further adjusted by a fudge factor, but for our purposes, we will leave it at 1. Now, since every neighborhood has its own neighborhood adjustment factor and every site index its influence factor, the situation is confounded and it's not possible to compare properties directly. The easy solution is to calculate all properties at the same site index and neighborhood factor. I chose site index 6 and neighborhood adjustment factor 6, but any numbers will do. Now the only variable is acreage. This simplified calculation gives one unique land value for every lot size. If we compare this number to the land assessment for that property, we will see how much more or less a property is assessed versus the calculated value. If we divide the land assessment by the calculated land value, we get the desirability index. The higher the index, the more desirable, because this corresponds to the number of times over the calculated value that the land is assessed for. For example, an index of 4 means that the land is assessed for 4 times the calculated land value. Comparing this index for any two properties gives us a direct way to compare their land regardless of acreage. Knowing this number, you can compare your 0.2 acre lot to your neighbor's 0.4 acre lot directly and know whose land, in the assessor's mind, is more desirable or valuable. So let's review. Determining the relative land desirability, which is based on how the assessor views relative value across the entire town. First, Calculate the land value for every property in York using an influence factor of 1.5, a neighborhood adjustment factor of 6, and the property's acreage. This normalizes everything and puts everyone on a level playing field. Then, dividing the property's actual FY24 land assessment by this calculated land value affords a desirability index. A high index means property is assessed for more than the calculated value, and that would be considered a high desirability. A low index means property is assessed for less than the calculated value, which would be a low desirability. The range is a relative scale to compare any property or neighborhood to any other property or neighborhood. This last slide shows the top 20 most desirable neighborhoods and individual properties based on land value. By far, neighborhood 160 has the most desirable properties. There are 16 out of 20 residences listed on the right side of this slide, although the average for the neighborhood puts it at 5 from the top, which is seen on the left table, showing the top 20 neighborhoods. On average, neighborhood 115 on the Nubble has the highest average desirability. If you'd like to know where your land ranks in terms of desirability in York, you just need to know your index number. Thank you for listening.